Well, your friends at the American Policy Roundtable have gathered around the table. They include Dave Zanotti, Rob Walgate, Jeff Sanders, Melanie Elsey, and of course our producer, Alan C. Duncan. Now, you may be asking, what's the title of today's program? Well, you're about to find out. Dave?
So this conversation takes us to a giant headline. And, we don't usually profile our titles a lot. Sometimes we don't put a title on a broadcast until it's just about to be posted. Right?
Yeah, we'll be like, what's the title of the show again?
Yeah, what's that title? And titles are hard. They're not easy. This one is easy, and it's personal. It's personal.
It's very personal, and I thought there would be more headlines on this, actually.
The
lack of headlines
disappeared dramatically. That's a part of what we got to cover. So we're calling this show Kaine's Blunder. All right? And
not the chicken restaurant.
No.
Not Raising Cane's?
Yes, and not the Caine Mutiny.
No, and not Genesis, all right, and Cain and Abel, okay? Right. This Caine is Kaine, and he is the seated senator, United States senator from Virginia, mm-hmm. Was nominee on the Democrat Party ticket for vice president, was almost the vice president of the United States. And we want to start with what he said. These are words that are on public record. They were declared in the United States Senate. These remarks are in context. Rob, the context in the Senate is what?
It's a nomination hearing in front of a Senate committee, and there are 5 people there that are up for nomination. Senator Kaine's remarks go towards Riley Barnes of Texas. He is nominated to be the Assistant Secretary of State for Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor. And he was referring to comments that Secretary Rubio made.
Yes. So let's take a listen. That's the context. You'll hear both comments, and then we'll be right back with some more comment.
In his first remarks to the State Department employees, Secretary Rubio emphasized that we are a nation founded on a powerful principle. And that powerful principle is that all men are created equal because our rights come from God, our Creator, not from our laws, not from our governments.
Our rights come from God, our Creator, not from our laws, not from our governments. I find that very, very troubling. I'm a devout person. I was a missionary in Honduras. We've got other devout folks in this room, Christian, Jewish, Muslim, American. The notion that rights don't come from laws and don't come from the government, but come from the Creator, that's what the Iranian government believes. It's a theocratic regime that bases its rule on Shia law and targets Sunnis, Baha'is, Jews, Christians, and other religious minorities. And they do it because they believe that they understand what natural rights are from their Creator. So the statement that our rights do not come from our laws or our governments is extremely troubling.
Now, before everyone jumps through their radio or their phone or their computer, we need to make a disclaimer. I don't think this is exactly the kind of thing where a public opinion poll is going to be necessary to determine how we feel here at the public square on this.
Well, we were at the American Mission Center when these comments came through, and I saw them. And I must admit, the first thing I thought, this is AI. I really did. I thought they were fake. So I was going back through, and I didn't show them to you, Dave, until I found them on Senate.gov.
Did you think?
Because I thought there's no way he said that.
Yeah, you sent the entire thing to us.
I did.
And you said it starts at hour whatever it starts at.
Because a U.S. senator could not possibly be that ignorant of history.
There's a million things you could go to.
Well, I didn't think he'd be willing to say that publicly because I'm looking around.
That was the outside voice.
Yeah.
Okay, that was you may have thought that, and in fairness to Senator Caine, Senator Caine is not the first person who's had these thoughts.
I've heard it.
Who's been a member of the United States Congress, whether the House or the Senate. In fact, if we go back in history to Franklin Delano Roosevelt had a gentleman named Wallace who was on his ticket, Henry Wallace, who was the seated vice president of the United States.
He was a communist.
Yes,
he was an actual communist.
When they took him off the ticket, he ran as a member of the Communist Party for the presidency.
Yeah.
Franklin Delano Roosevelt had a communist in the White House.
This is
as
in the
his vice president.
1930s. Yeah.
And then he had to push him out.
Right. because everyone caught on to him. Okay,
Yeah.
Right.
and it wouldn't work. So now you could do an entire interesting study on Roosevelt in this era, and in what you would discover is the people who simply stamp Roosevelt as saying, and he was a commie too, therefore, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, no.
Roosevelt is that period of politics in the American presidency is very interested, and Roosevelt was trying to do some ferocious politicking in stopping third parties from diminishing his vote so that he would lose to the Republicans. Mm-hmm. And in so doing, he was coalescing all kinds of groups to get electoral college votes, particularly in states like Wisconsin and Minnesota, which were not Republican bastions. Mm-hmm. Right? And so he was afraid that he was going to lose electoral college votes. And so he was absorbing people. He kind of did to the Socialist Party what the Republicans did to the Tea Party.
Yes.
At a later date in time. He was attempting to absorb that wing
and
neutralize it.
And we've seen the Democrats do it more recently by allowing Bernie Sanders to participate in presidential debates by
similar situation going
by
on.
opening the tent and letting them in to one corner of the tent. I don't feel like they give them access to the entire tent, but they allow
and people
them
like
to take part.
Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib, and there's that wing in the coalition and the Democrat Party
now,
today.
I call that the Islamic wing.
I called it the jihadist wing.
Okay,
but whatever you want.
Right, but I mean, it's clearly a different agenda, a different worldview, and a different set of allegiances.
Yes.
Now, I know we're supposed to not do that. Our oath of office is designed to say that we serve America and the Constitution to protect and defend the Constitution. If you compare the Constitution against socialism, you compare the Constitution against Islamic thought and Sharia law, you get some real conflicts.
Yep.
There's some real problems. Senator Kaine was honest enough to say his concern out loud. Now, by the way, for those of you that are now screaming at the radio, that's about all the credit I'm giving Senator Kaine on this one. Give us a second, but we're trying to be fair because we all agree we don't like the idea of looking like we're an echo chamber. There's bigger implications here than just picking on one guy.
Yes, and I guess I'll pick on him a little bit in the sense that his comments in regards to Sharia law, I would love to see him make those comments or be interested to see him make those comments if Rashida Tlaib was in the room, if Ilhan Omar was in the room, to say it that way, because there's times in other remarks where he seems to be a defender of those things.
What he had to say in comparing the Declaration of Independence, the moral premise of the Declaration and Sharia law is, first off, he doesn't know either one of them. All right, I mean, there's not he flunks the test in both groups. Okay.
So why? How did he get to that point? That's my. Why did he say? Because he seemed very proud of himself when he said it. To me, it was witnessing two people talk completely past each other. Why is he saying this? I think we can tease this out.
That's what caught my attention because if you watch the video, as wrong as he is on the points that he was making, he was sincere. If you watch the expression in his eyes, he
really believes what he said.
Sincerity
and sanctimony.
Right.
It seemed to me like he's righter than you. You know, it was because it wasn't a question. It really wasn't. It was a little.
He wasn't ranting. He wasn't raving.
But it was a mini lecture.
Yes, he was exhorting.
He was merely saying what tens of millions of Americans right now ignorantly believe. And I don't mean ignorant as a form of stupid. I mean they haven't been taught properly a real American history. They actually believe what he just said. He was just the mouthpiece.
Or they might believe it's possible.
Oh, okay.
Maybe.
I'll go with that, sure.
Do you not believe that's what's being taught in academia at all our major universities around the country?
No doubt.
This generation, don't you believe that's what's being said in classrooms?
Well, I heard it 40 years ago.
I know it's really.
Yes, I did. I heard 40 years ago, and I'm a history major, in my history classes in college, that the founding fathers were deists and atheists. I actually heard that. And now, at that time, I was 19, 20 years old. I had no defense against that. I've learned a lot since then.
Well, and the platform upon which that is constructed is, if you will, a platform of non-information, and if you wanted to use an older term, ignorance, in the sense of, no, the professors know what they're doing.
Yes.
All right. But the students don't, and they're in a trusting environment. And the logic is simply this. It goes back to this simple reality. And here's where we're all in such a train wreck. To do what they did to Jeff in college requires that no one's looking at the document.
They were not.
All right. And that what we're doing is we're reading what historians have told us about the document, which was that this was the period of the Great Enlightenment, and that the secularists, the materialists, the non-God people, the godless equation people had basically reached a point where reason and intellect were sufficient, that they had outgrown the ancient superstitions of religion, and those were really the founders. And that's where they went forward. And then they have this line of defense by saying God, the Bible, Jesus is not even mentioned in the Constitution. Therefore, it's perfectly clear that that also is an absolute Enlightenment document and a statement of the Enlightenment and a statement of divorce from prior faith-based views of the life, the world. It's basically the godless equation. There's just one problem. The Declaration is at the National Archive. You can still read it in English. And it says we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure those rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just power from the consent of the governed. The Declaration says our rights come from God. Now, Tim Caine says that's not right. That's the difference.
There you have it. We've set the table for today's Public Square, but there's a whole meal to come, so stay with us now with the whole team on board.
Every day, 535 people are charged with representing all of us in Washington, D.C. They preside over the largest budget in the world. They hold the Constitution in their hands. They can help protect our liberties or look the other way. 535 people. We put them in office. Isn't it time that we hold them in our prayers? A public service message from the American Policy Roundtable. Spreading the light of liberty across the land. Now back to the Public Square.
Welcome back to today's edition of the Public Square. Now, you may be shaking your head saying, what did I hear them say just a few minutes ago? Yeah, you heard correctly, but let's continue to talk about it with the whole team. Here's Dave.
Let me restate. We all know what the Declaration says. What Tim Caine is saying, it doesn't mean what you think it means. That rights coming from God is dangerous. That if you believe that your rights come from God, you're un-American, and in fact, you're probably an advocate of Sharia law.
I think he's just completely misunderstanding what we mean when we say natural rights. Because he's saying, hey, I'm a religious guy. What is he, Catholic, I think, or says he is? I'm a religious guy. I believe in natural law, natural rights. Well, if you do, you would understand that that actually gives more human dignity, not less. Me believing that you have natural rights doesn't mean I get to force God on you.
Well, let's take a second and talk about natural rights. Where'd they come from?
Right. God. They would.
I mean, because if you understand the founding era, the idea that nature was created by God, and so what they're basically doing is trying to expand the same statement, which is your rights come from God, and they're as obvious as the trees, the wind, the sky around you. This is the way God made people.
And you don't have to believe in God for your rights to have come from him.
You still have them.
You still have them.
My professors told me that the founding fathers merely used religious Christian jargon, like, the Creator and so forth, just to pacify the ignorant Christian masses so they could get this stuff passed. And I sat there.
That's a very inspiring
and so,
founding, isn't it?
Yeah, well, of course, I'm 19, 20 years old, and I'm sitting there thinking, okay, so every single member of the founding fathers, the 56 signers of the Declaration, I think 54 who worked on the Constitution, they were all lying.
In on the conspiracy.
Yeah. All of them. So I thought if I look at their original documents, which I did not do at that time, I'm going to find out in their notes, their journals to themselves, I fooled them again. Yeah. So they all believe that rights came from nature, just random atoms
Kaine
colliding.
says that our rights come from law and government.
His exact quote is, "The notion that rights don't come from laws and don't come from the government, but come from the Creator, that's what the Iranian government believes." That is a false statement. It is exactly the opposite of what the Iranian. He's saying rights come from the government. The Iranians say rights come from the government.
And the government is the Sharia law.
Right.
Yes.
So Tim Caine was advocating for
both
what
sides.
the Iranian government is postulating.
The Declaration says that governments are instituted to secure the rights you already have.
Exactly.
Given by God.
Right.
Yeah.
That's a huge point. That's what makes America different.
Could you imagine him taking a class from Dr. Allen and handing that in as an answer?
Well, Dr. Allen is very compassionate, but I've never gotten an A+ from him on anything. I think I may have meagerly climbed to an A- at one point, but that's still under contest.
Then he took it back.
When you look at the Declaration and you look at nature's rights, the rights that come from God, it is that everyone's to be treated equal, right? The ground's level. When you look at the laws that have been created by governments all across the world, where's the ground level? They're giving special rights and privileges to those.
Could we start with Sharia law?
There you go.
Excuse me, Melanie, you wouldn't be at this table.
Exactly. But the other element that we're leaving out, at least in the details, is that the governments are instituted to secure the rights, but with the consent of the governed.
With the consent of the
And
governed.
he completely ignores that.
Totally
piece of our
misses
history.
the concept of where does the Declaration and the Constitution place true moral authority. Not in laws and governments. He's wrong on the Declaration. He fails on Sharia law, he fails on biblical thought, he fails on the founding, and he fails on constitutional law because the moral authority of the Constitution is in we the people. Why? Because God gave us our rights, government didn't, and people created the governments. You know, we've said for years, we got to remember that the states created the Constitution. Yes and no. It's the people of the states that created the Constitution. The moral authority of this country resides in we the people because God gave us the right to do it that way. That's the whole premise. So for this idea to come out as from a United States Senator, read that quote again, Melanie. I like it better in your voice, by the way.
The notion that rights don't come from laws and don't come from the government, but come from the Creator, that's what the Iranian government believes. That's crazy.
By the way, just so anybody who's listening saying, well, you haven't read Sharia law either. Yes, I have.
We have.
I have read the textbook. It is one version of Sharia law. I think there are like 4 key versions of it, but it's called the Way of the Traveler, and I have it in my personal library, and yes, I have read it.
And we have also read the Quran.
Yes.
Yeah, and Tim Caine, in furthering his remarks that day, did talk about the LGBTQ community and basically being under attack and where do their rights and where do their law, where does their protection come from? Has he not seen President Trump's cabinet? Has he not seen the people that President Trump has brought in to serve?
Scott Bessent, Tammy Bruce.
But even before we get there, I want to suggest that we have a tendency to evaluate justice based on scoreboards. That's not where justice comes from. It doesn't matter who puts who, where, what. The fundamental of our form of civil government is that you as a human have the same rights as every other human. Before we designate that as into gender or eye color or hair color or socioeconomic status or skin color, it does not matter. In our system of government, all humans derive the same rights from the Creator. That's why government cannot regulate your rights or take them away from you outside of the consent.
I thought Riley Barnes's response in part was just so fascinating because he pointed out that rights that are inherent in human dignity actually predate the law.
Of course they do.
because they come from the Creator, from the moment of creation.
That's exactly right. Now, there are people who are perhaps listening and rolling their eyes and say, let me count here. I hear an echo chamber of white voices having this. Did anyone ever talk to you about America's challenge with slavery? Well, of course, from the beginning. But if we're willing to get 100 years behind the eyes of the people who signed the Declaration and the Constitution, we can put them in context and actualize the reality that a very good number of them were in the process of laying down their lives to make sure that the confession of the Declaration would become reality for all people. And they knew that America would never, ever survive if we didn't resolve the horror of slavery. They didn't invent it, they inherited it, and many of them laid down their lives to stop it, and they couldn't get it done before a war erupted, proving their point all along. You can't make a confession of this level of moral authority about the equality of rights of all people and then live as the abundant hypocrites of those that would accept the enslavement of others. It is impossible, and eventually a house divided against itself will fall. It will be destroyed.
And just to put a point on to follow up on that, exactly what Senator Caine was saying as it applies to the slavery issue. Mm-hmm. His point of view would be that slavery would be okay because it defined the rights as government at that time defined them.
I think if Senator Caine had the time to think that through, what you just said, he would never say out loud what he said out loud again. I'm not sure it would change his point of view, because his point of view is the fact that it somehow terrifies him that God's in the equation.
Well, it was interesting to me that he brought up, the Iranian when you talk about Sharia law, but we can look all across the world where religion or government and religion is not involved in setting laws, and they enslave a group of people just because the government can.
Well, let's go back to the Soviet Union, which for 70 years in the godless equation is it's the abundant example. And what's frightening is to think that if Senator Caine had made that comment in the United States Senate 40 years ago, he most likely would have been censured immediately. He would have been called down by the chair to retract that statement and censured by the body.
Doesn't it say, "In God we trust," over the head of the Speaker of the House? What is it? Does it say anything like that in the Senate?
I don't know. I've been in the Senate chambers enough times to know it does not.
Kind of tough to miss that, right?
Well, let's take this into the historical context. Let's take some time and let's go back. And let's talk about that Soviet experience. And what I'd like to do is it in the application of a film, a documentary that we've all been watching, that takes us back to the role of faith as the deconstructing agent of the Soviet Empire. And that played out in real time in the world back through the 1930s, 40s, the whole way to the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 and in 1991, the whole collapse of the Soviet Empire. Now, people would say, well, it died of geopolitics. I heard one member of the Soviet Union say a long time ago, what killed the Communist Party in the Soviet Union was bureaucracy. I've heard all kinds of people try to spin what really happened. But there is a story, and it emanates from one of the Soviet satellite countries that were captured, a country that has a history from the beginning of being on the map, being off the map, being on the map, being off the map. One of those countries, a country that is more embattled than any other portion of the European landscape, and that's the nation of Poland. The nation of Poland saw all that you could see during World War II in regards to the Nazis and the Soviets, and then became an occupied satellite. And interestingly enough, if we're being honest with history, and we're about to go into that discussion in just 1 minute, interestingly enough, it was that little country of spiritual warriors that was the straw that broke the camel's back of the USSR.
I can't wait for that history to be retold here in a moment on The Public Square. If you joined us late, as I always say, you got to listen from the beginning. thepublicsquare.com. You can now listen on YouTube as well. Just type in The Public Square on YouTube and it should take you right to our latest program, The Public Square on YouTube. More with the team coming up.
Spreading the light of liberty across the land. Now back to the Public Square.
Let's get right back to the conversation today on the Public Square entitled Caine's Blunder. Our team is Dave Zanotti, Rob Walgate, Jeff Sanders, Melanie Elsey, and Alan C. Duncan. And Rob, why don't we recap for those who may have just joined us?
We're talking about remarks that Senator Caine gave in a Senate committee hearing about a nomination process, and he referenced remarks from Marco Rubio. And what's interesting to me is 2 days before Senator Caine gave those remarks, Marco Rubio gave a speech, and he was at the Solidarity Prize Awards. And I'm gonna butcher the name, Jeff. I'm gonna because I say it incorrectly. We know the individual.
Yes, we are not Polish. Wish we were, but his name is Lech Wałęsa. And so Lech was the leader of the Solidarity movement in Poland for all those years as resistance to the communists.
And at that awards ceremony, Marco Rubio gave a speech, and part of his remarks said, freedom is not actually a natural human instinct. If you think and you study history, almost the entirety of human history has been defined by oppression. Few people up until just a couple hundred years ago even had a choice on who governed them. So if you look at the course of human history, freedom as we understand it, the freedom of speech, the freedom of expression, the freedom of religion, all these freedoms that I think we take for granted on a daily basis in our own lives are really not the norm. They've been the exception. Now, what it tells you is that it lives in the human spirit, but has not been a part of the human behavior. And it's only in the last 200 to 300 years, this very sort of new notion of rights that come from your Creator, from God, rights that governments that actually work for the people, not the people that work for the government, the right to actually be able to have a voice and choose who governs over you, all these are incredibly new concepts. Those words are from a speech from Secretary of State Marco Rubio.
And he's addressing a group of people that are of Polish descent.
At the Solidarity Awards.
Okay. Sure.
And we had a little homework assignment around the table to watch a documentary, Liberating a Continent.
And the subtitle is, Liberating a Continent, John Paul II and the Fall of Communism.
Can I go back before we totally go to that? Can I go to the Marco Rubio remarks? Sure. I appreciate what he's saying and the sentiment of it, but I don't want to say that this is a new idea. I mean, we can trace this back. I mean, we talk about the Hebrew Republic. This goes back to ancient times. That's been an unfolding of practice.
Yes.
But I wouldn't say, hey, there's a new thing we just thought of.
I don't want to chastise Senator Rubio's speechwriter. Because he may have been the speechwriter there. Yes, he's getting really close.
Yeah.
But you're very right to raise that question. And the question is, where does true liberty? And I would also humbly submit, we're not, just like republic and democracy, those two words are not the same. Freedom and liberty, the two words are not the same. They're closely aligned, but they're not the same. The question of people being free in the perspective of conscience, of having the religious liberty to decide how they will govern themselves, emanates in Western culture from the Hebrew Republic. That's Professor Eric Nelson at Harvard's work, and it's well documented, and it's brilliant.
Dr. Allen, in his translation of Montesquieu and some of his attending essays, talks about King Cyrus as well, tracing religious liberty to that point as well.
Exactly. So we can take these scholars and learn from them and understand. You can open your Bible, open the Old Testament, and you realize the amazing transaction that happened at Sinai. People think that God wrote the 10 Commandments on the stone, gave them to Moses, and Moses came down and said, here's the rules, boys and girls. This is what we're doing because I say so, because God said so. If you take the time to read through those chapters in Exodus, what you find is an abundance of meetings. Moses went up, the people went up. God spoke, the people listened. The people debated, the people voted. They voted. They decided that they would agree out of conscience that they would obey God. That's why it's called the Old Covenant. It was a document of agreement. And the law that went forward was decentralized in a Republican fashion of government, Republican little r, the Hebrew Republic. That's why it's called that. So this is an ancient concept. It is an ancient concept.
That deals with a process, not the snapping of one's fingers and having it done immediately. There was engagement, involvement, and I think today we're so spoiled, we want things done in a whim.
So Marco Rubio's comments are right if you exclude the Hebrew Republic. But if you do that, then you kind of
well, and then you come up through the New Testament and you have we must obey God rather than man.
Right.
Yeah.
And you have Jesus in Luke 4 standing there saying that he came to set the captives free, quoting the Hebrew prophets. So there is this. This is the stuff, though. I have to tell you, this is what I get up every morning excited about talking about, because this is what changes hearts and minds and attitudes and cultures going forward. The fact that the God, well, let's say it this way. Quote Jefferson, a Virginian: "The God who gave us life,
Gave us liberty.
gave us liberty."
Amen.
So Thomas Jefferson could certainly answer the senator from Virginia today.
And that was, I mean, that movement is what the documentary Liberating a Continent
So
was
how did
about.
it happen?
Back to the movie,
Let's
yes.
talk about that. How did it happen? You go back and you take a country that's as deeply religious in Christian Catholicism as Poland. That they have survived countless wars of oppression against countless adversaries, and their core anchor of their culture has always been their church and their faith.
Amen.
Now, I'm not advocating for Roman Catholicism here. I kind of take the same position C.S. Lewis took at Mere Christianity. That's not the point of our conversation. The reality of the impact of their faith is.
And how it was used in that time when Pope John Paul II was used. I mean, you think about his childhood and understanding that and growing up.
What he went through.
I mean, he lost his mother, I believe, at age 9.
Yeah, I think 8 or 9. Yeah.
8 or 9 years old.
Then lost his dad at the end of the war.
Lost his dad at the end of the war, but he watched his father and how much he prayed.
Yes.
And how much of a leader. I mean, that's what I took from it as a father. You know, today of teenagers thinking, wow, your kids are watching you.
He was born in 1920 in southern Poland. 1920 was the year, correct me if I'm wrong, Jeff, that Lenin invaded Poland.
Yes, it was the Polish-Russian War of 1919 to 1921 or 22, but 1920 was a real turning point. The Russians almost beat the Poles. They were in the gates of Warsaw, and it was the Catholic priests throughout Warsaw who told everybody, get up off your behinds. They said it in Polish, much meaner than I just did. Get out there and fight. And fight they did.
But
and they
throughout
drove
his
the Russians
childhood,
back.
He watched the abuses of these invasions and what they
Back
did
and forth.
back and forth, and how
Yes.
people died.
Yes.
Very in a very egregious just to watch the
Slaughtered.
elements slaughtered. And so he was impacted by the atrocious treatment of one human being to another.
Yes.
The
in the
Nazis.
context of what he learned from his parents.
Nazis invaded in
through his
1939,
faith.
September 1st, 1939, and occupied like 2/3 of Poland. The Soviets attacked 2 weeks later from the other side and occupied the other third of Poland. Which side would you rather be under? They were both slaughtering people left and right.
Yes.
This is what the Polish people endured.
And I'm sure they were slaughtering everybody, but they were also, and for the record, Jeff did not watch this documentary. He just already knew this. I thought our listeners should know this. He was the only one we weren't worried about not doing this actual homework because he'd already done it like 30 years ago.
And didn't forget.
Yes, and remembers. But the documentary makes the point that they killed 20% of the Catholic priests.
Yes.
And they were also killing writers and thinkers
or shipping them off to Siberia.
People that could think for themselves, I believe it said.
So,
yes, the Nazis were killing the Jews and anyone else who was dissenting in any way, shape, or form. And then the Nazis lost, and the Russians took over, and they basically imprisoned everyone in Poland.
Yeah. What did you guys make? They go over really quickly. What did you make of the I had not heard of the Katyn Forest. I think I'd heard of it, but I didn't hear that it was covered up by the West. The West just blamed it on the Germans. At least this is what the documentary says.
It was covered up by the Soviets at first. That took place in 1940 when the Soviets took all of these Polish army officers who were the elites, plus their medical doctors, their priests, and their educators and everybody, and slaughtered them. So when the Germans,
like 20,000 people, right?
Yes,
around
25,000
in the Katyn Forest and elsewhere. So when the Germans invaded in 1941, they came across these graves,
mass
saw
graves.
the manner in which they had been executed,
and they started saying the Soviets did this. Well, who's going to believe the Nazis? The Nazis brought in American and British POWs and showed them, the evidence. These guys still had on, I think, their winter uniforms. And the Americans said, for the first time, I believe the Nazis were not lying. It wasn't until the Soviet Union fell that the Russians finally fessed up and said, yep, we did it.
We're so grateful to have our own house historian, Jeff Sanders, with us here on the Public Square. Always contributes to the conversation. Hey, the whole team will continue in a moment here on the Public Square, our program titled Caine's Blunder. Don't step away. There's much more ahead on the Public Square.
We will be right back for more on the Public Square.
Before we continue today, let me say thank you for your support of the American Policy Roundtable, which makes this program, The Public Square, possible. Truly a listener-supported program, so we appreciate your responses very much. All right, let's get back to the team now, and the conversation today is centered around some comments made by Senator Tim Caine. Caine's Blunder is the topic of today's program, and more film suggestions coming up.
The point of the film, there are many points of the film, is it illustrates the power of resistance. It illustrates the power of faith. Now, there are several films that are worth watching in this venue. There's a film called The Prophet that is completely translated in English, but you watch the film in Polish, so it's all subtitled. It's beautiful cinematography. It speaks of the people who preceded Cardinal Wojtyła, what his bishop was like, and the bishops around him, the ones that the Soviets did capture, the ones that the Soviets did persecute and jail, and how they got out. And it shows under the regime of the Soviet Empire how difficult it was for the Catholic Church to survive and the bishops to survive in Poland, and how as Father Karol Wojtyła, the priest, just another Catholic priest in Poland, was doing his work with youth and young people across Poland, the impact that he was having. And then he became an auxiliary bishop, and then he became a bishop. And the extraordinary movement that was happening of Christian conversion and revival throughout Poland through this young people's work.
Well, yeah, because he had to go to a secret seminary.
Yes.
Even so, he goes to a secret seminary,
secret ordination,
and then the people he decides to pour into are, to your point, is the youth, because he understood that they were the future.
And if you want to go back a couple of years to Christmas in America, we tell this story.
Yeah.
All right, so just
1981.
1981, the story is told. It's an extraordinary story. There's so many. We have two stories: Romuald Spazowski's story, and then we also have the story of how Campus Crusade, an American evangelical organization, actually was able to go to Poland and serve, and actually worked with Bishop Karol Wojtyła, who would become Pope John Paul II.
Can I just share one other thing that jumped out to me in this documentary was, as someone who appreciates the arts, it made a point to say that he was steeped in the literature of his people. He was steeped in Polish literature
and theater,
and of course the scriptures. So he viewed even that as an act of resistance. And I just think today how often, I'll just say it, communist elements in our own country don't want the youth or the young people to learn American history, the stories, even the legends of America. It doesn't want them to study this literature. There's a radical departure in a lot of places from learning the history of your own people.
That's why folks who are setting education policy, when it comes to the history that's being taught, they need to require that the original documents be used, because otherwise you're getting false interpretations and spins on those documents from modern day authors.
You get Tim Caine.
Well, and I would suggest that Tim Caine would lose a debate with a fourth grader if the fourth grader read the words of the Declaration of Independence and asked the senator to explain how his point of view could possibly match with the words that were written and signed and sacrificed for. It's just a situation where the facts are the facts. Now, Senator Caine has every right to his opinion, and he has every right to work against the founding of the United States. This is a free country, and he is an elected member of the United States Senate. Now, he swore on oath to uphold the Constitution, which gets to be a little bit difficult if you profane and disassociate the Declaration. However, he still has the right to free speech, and he has the right to be exposed. And at the bottom line, this isn't about our opinion. This is about another Virginian. It's about what Thomas Jefferson wrote in the Declaration of Independence. And Thomas Jefferson wasn't alone. He had a committee of 4 more people behind him, including John Adams himself.
Well, as I watched, Liberating a Continent, and you saw, in essence, you saw the godless equation. You saw the Russian army. You saw them marching. You saw the things they were doing.
You saw how they always, their first objective was to kill the religious.
Kill the religious, go after them. And that was, the Polish people talked about when Pope John came to Poland and gave that message. It's sometimes I feel like even we feel this way today. They talked about the encouragement came from, they knew there were millions others out there.
Yeah.
They weren't alone. There were millions of other people that felt the same way.
More than 100 years before Pope John Paul was even born, our founders were talking about how important freedom of conscience is. They described it as the most important inerrant right. Then decades and decades later, we have Pope John Paul. In his early years prior to being named Pope, he inspired what would be a revolution of conscience. But I want to read a quote from him as they were drafting what was called the Declaration of Religious Freedom. Quote, "We have to anchor the right to religious freedom in the conception of the human being. The root of his dignity is his capacity for God, and it's because of that society must grant the human being the freedom to conduct that search for God without coercion." That's what freedom of conscience encapsulates.
And implicit in Senator Caine's criticism is the notion that to believe the Declaration requires government compulsion, which is absolutely not true.
Not true.
Not only is it not true in the Hebrew Republic, it's not true in the Christian Church of the New Testament. It is never true in biblical faith. There is no capacity for compulsion. People believe or they don't. If your rights come from God, you have the right to disbelieve.
Well, where there is compulsion, though, and they talk about this in the film, there is compulsion in the atheist Marxist worldview. Always, because they see it as a competing ideology. And one of the things that I thought this film did a really good job of bringing out. They talked about, it's the playbook. They laid out the Marxist playbook in this film. Churches destroyed, and they wanted to specifically destroy the family unit. Did you guys pick up on that?
Yes.
They said that they specifically went after kindergarten teachers. That was the first people they wanted to put into positions of power so that they could indoctrinate the children. They wanted people living in small apartments so they couldn't have big families. They wanted them working shifts late at night so the families couldn't be, or during the day.
Like
so
4 6-hour shifts they talked about, so you'd be split up.
Yeah, you timed it so that you couldn't be together as a family. They did that stuff on purpose. And then I look around this country today and I see elements. I don't know whether or not they're doing it on purpose, but there's an animating something in our country today that's achieving the same goals.
Well, let's do this. Let's take a break, and when we come back, it's important we get to the so what. What do we do now? And I want to say it now and say it again because it's worth repeating. The thing that Pope John Paul II taught from the time he was a priest working with young people and a bishop and a cardinal, he taught that the answer to overcoming communism is for Christians to be more Christian.
Well, what a great line. Thank you, Dave. And there's more to come on the public square. Some of you have to leave us now, but if that's true, this entire program is always archived online, so you can listen anytime at thepublicsquare.com. Okay, so what conclusions can we draw from today's conversation? We'll get to that next as you stay with us. Let's turn back to the team here at the Public Square now and continue today's conversation, Caine's Blunder, with a very in-depth conversation and history lessons for us today as well. Here's Rob Walgate.
Dave, on that point you made at the end of the last segment, I think when they talked about a private conversation that Pope John Paul had and Scripture, and they were talking about, the importance of it all, and he referenced the truth shall set you free.
Yes.
That's what he was concerned with the most, the truth.
Yes.
The truth.
He was actually asked if you had to get rid of all of Scripture and
if they
keep
were all
one
destroyed.
phrase,
Yeah, if Scripture was all the Scriptures were destroyed, what would be the one sentence you would keep? What would be the one passage you would keep? The truth shall set you free.
And it did. When my atheist friends sneer at what we say about how God governs in the affairs of men, and God
quoted, by the way, by the deist Benjamin Franklin on the floor of the Constitutional Convention in 1787.
Yeah. That's actually not a verse in the Bible, but it is a concept all over the Bible. And when they sneer at that and say your rights don't come from God and so forth, I always respond by saying, can you tell me the day that the blood-red, blood-soaked flag of the Soviet Union was hauled down over the Kremlin? It was hauled down on December 25th, 1991. Was that an accident? No. The God of the Bible, who was believed in by millions of people all over Eastern Europe and around the world, triumphed. And that bestial system was destroyed. Now, it's still in effect in communist China and in North Korea and in many other places around the world.
And there are people today who are toying with socialism, thinking that America has failed them. And so let's go ahead and experiment with something different that seems so much more intriguing and compassionate than this harsh biblical discussion of truth. Let's just have kind of a kinder, more, let's, thanks.
The body count isn't high enough. Let's try it again because
I think
we're
it's
the
more
right
of a situation where if you don't know history, you're doomed to repeat it.
That's George Santayana who said that. Yeah.
Well, also, I think back to my childhood. I would have been in 84, 85, 7, 8 years old. And I think back to a movie that was very popular at the time. But now, putting in a historical context, I didn't realize how big it was, and that's Rocky IV.
Yeah.
That's when he goes to Russia to fight on Christmas Day.
I will break you.
People thought Stallone was just kind of a punch-drunk, stupid guy who got lucky, right?
He got his symbolism very right.
Oh, man, did he ever?
He kind of was aware of what was happening in the world. Mm-hmm. He really was. And the wonderful thing is that when we want to know the truth will set us free. And if you want to know the truth about where communism began to fall apart, you go to Poland. You go to Poland. And what was the formula? You don't fight communism. You become a better Christian. Because if enough of us are better Christians, there'll be no room left for their mythology. There'll be now resistance is required. And people died. People were persecuted, they were prosecuted, they were imprisoned, and they died. This is not a bloodless sacrifice. But the bottom line was the Poles didn't rise up with weapons against the Soviets that would have done nothing but annihilate the Poles. They knew that. They counted on God, and they made the sacrifice that perhaps is even greater, the sacrifice of patient endurance.
It talked about Pope John Paul.
And resistance, I should
II.
say.
It talked about his prayer life, Pope John Paul's prayer life. It began with prayer. He would spend hours just on his face in this beautiful chapel. Like some of the churches that they show in this documentary piece are beautiful. It has a beautiful private chapel that he would pray in. I was showing it to Caleb. He really appreciates. He's my artistic child, at least visual artistic, and he loved seeing some of the churches.
So what's interesting, Al, is it used to be the old joke was someone would say something say the obvious, and you would say, well, is the Pope Catholic? And then for a period of time of about 22 years, people would say, well, is the Pope Polish? The idea that there would ever have been a Polish Pope is as unbelievable as the idea that there would ever be an American Pope. When John Paul became Pope, the world stopped and said, what? Did anyone even imagine that this ascendancy to this position would come back to this man who had been teaching fundamental Christian doctrine of a relationship with Jesus Christ for generations to young people in Poland, who would then take that into the workplace? Do you know that in the workplace every day they started every day at work at the factories with a religious service? Mm-hmm. Before they started to go to work, they went to prayer. And it wasn't like, oh, there's three guys over there by the flagpole. It was, they didn't start work until. When they called for a general strike, they didn't leave and go home. They went in the factories and shut the doors and saying, we're not working.
These were tough steel workers and dock workers. And they kept saying to themselves, this is God versus the machine.
Yes.
This is us being the hands and feet of God Almighty against the machine that wants to crush us.
Yeah, that solidarity, they were willing to show up for it. I mean, some of the pictures in the film where they would have 500,000 people at one place. You're like, looking
it's like, well, they're going to have to kill us all.
Social media.
Yeah, they're going to have to kill us all.
If we're all Christian enough, I guess they're just going to have to kill us all.
And it talked in the film about the time that the Russians basically had tanks lined up on the Polish border.
They were quite willing to kill them.
They were ready to go in. And they talked about a letter that was sent behind the scenes.
I think it was Brezhnev that he wrote to.
The Pope sent the letter.
Yeah.
The Pope sent the letter.
To the leader of the Soviets.
To the leader of the Soviets. There was no written response, but the tanks didn't invade.
Now, if you're getting more and more curious, I would suggest that you have to take a look and bring two Protestants into this conversation at this point. And if you watch the film, you'll see it. And there are several others to do it, because now we have to bring in Margaret Thatcher and we have to bring in Ronald Reagan.
Amen.
Because even before Reagan was president, he saw Pope John Paul visit Poland for the first time, and he was moved to tears and said, we've got to get to know him. Even before he was elected, he knew. Even before the 1980 election, it was 1979, and he knew this was the guy who was going to bring down the nemesis of liberty, was going to be the Pope. Now, the Declaration of Independence says our rights come from God. Do we believe this? As Americans, do we just talk about it? Do we just pay the taxes to keep it framed in the National Archives? Or do we believe it?
One other thing is that, people say, well, God's not in the Constitution. Okay, so many of the same people who wrote the Constitution were also there signing the Declaration. So in 11 years, from 1776 to 1787, somehow they changed their mind. And in Article 7, the second paragraph, when they signed their names, 38 or 39 people signed their names, it says, we affix our names on this day, I think it's September 17th, in the year of our
Lord.
Now they say our Lord. They're not talking about Buddha. They're not talking about Karl Marx. In the year of our Lord, 1787. Now the people say, well, that's just religious jargon. They really didn't mean it. So they're all lying?
Once again.
Once again.
We have a document that we're printing called an oration. It's the wonderful story of John Quincy Adams and his view of a Christian America from his July 4th, 1837 oration. Yes, I said it, a Christian America, but I'm not the person who used the words. It was John Quincy Adams. In addition to that, at the end of that document, there are a number of wonderful pieces added by William B. Allen, including the Declaration and the Constitution, which he defines as best friends. There are so many elements of the Declaration and the Constitution that harmonize with biblical principles that you can easily understand. They didn't have to mention God. They were simply walking out the principles. That's the point.
Can I say one more thing about the Solidarity Movement?
Yes.
Really cool logo. You should look it up.
Yeah. I remember that.
I don't throw this word around lightly, but today's conversation was inspiring. And if you'd like to listen from the beginning, go to thepublicsquare.com.
The Public Square is a broadcast service of the American Policy Roundtable.